The telecom industry has a pressing need for sustainability as a pathway to a more sustainable supply chain and to meet the needs of evolving consumer demands for eco-friendly offerings. Joining me to discuss this journey from ambition to action is Biju Nair, President of Global Connected Living at Assurant. Biju, welcome. Network operators have several reasons to become more sustainable, but Assurant is really focused on making the supply chain more sustainable. Why is that important to operators?
Hello, Clarence, and thank you and TelecomTV for the opportunity to talk about this very important topic. To your question about what about supply chain? If you think about it, prior to the pandemic, if you ask the average consumer anything about supply chain or supply chain constraints, they did not know anything about. This was not a common terminology that people used. But the pandemic and the impact that pandemic had on availability of the products made people aware of supply chain constraints and the impacts of supply chain constraints in a very strong way. So, for example, the first phone that was launched right after the pandemic happened was the iPhone 13. And if you notice during that time, during the 2021 timeframe, those devices were only available in abundance in the higher end models. Because as you can imagine, what manufacturers would do is if you have a few parts available, you want to make sure you're making the most out of it so that you can derive the maximum revenue and maximum profits out of the products that you can build from it. So the natural tendency is rather than build the $800 phone, let me build the $1,100 phone and then try to see how many consumers want that. And obviously, that year turned out to be well for a good one for most of the OEMs. So that was the impact of the supply chain, the disruption that happened during the pandemic period. Now, what that also did is it raised consumer awareness to what can be done to deal with a situation like that. So a multiple number of things happened. First one is the devices started to get more expensive because of the availability. So if I wanted to buy a regular device worth $800, that was not available. So I had to opt for the $1,100, $1,200 device. Secondarily, in foreign markets, particularly Europe and Japan, many of the manufacturers increased the price by 20 to 25% to cope with the foreign exchange differential. So all of those led to a situation where consumer was starting to look for alternative solutions. And that gave rise to the use of pre-owned and purchase of pre-owned or refurbished mobile devices. Typically, what would end up happening is you're using say an iPhone 10 or a Galaxy 22, and then you want to upgrade your device. And the choices that are available to you, if they happen to be on the more expensive side of things, you will choose to get a refurbished device that is in the iPhone 13 variety or a Samsung Galaxy 23, etc. And that tends to be more cost effective. But many of the retailers and the network operators who sell these devices also took advantage of the fact that there is an opportunity to get consumers to be more green sensitive, more aware, more eco-friendly. And many of them started to take advantage of that by, especially the younger generation consumers who are more aware of being both eco-friendly as well as more friendly towards their wallets, started to lean towards the option of getting a refurbished device or a remanufactured device so that can fulfill their needs. So the economic aspect and the supply chain disruption aspect drove consumers towards a more eco-friendly approach or a green approach towards buying refurbished phones. And along our discussion, we'll talk about what were the advantages that type of a mindset generated throughout our industry.
Can you talk more about what you're seeing among consumers in terms of their openness to more sustainable offerings?
Yeah, absolutely. So the consumers are very engaged in this topic. So if you look at the technology transition in the wireless industry, we hear the term 5G, which is the latest wireless technology that is available. And consumers are upgrading to 5G for the obvious reasons, faster technology, easier access, et cetera, et cetera. However, this also creates a challenge for us from a sustainability standpoint because there are consumers not only here in the US, but internationally as well, upgrading from 3G sometimes or 4G technologies into 5G. Now, what do you do with these older devices that the consumers are carrying around in their pockets as they tend to upgrade towards the latest and greatest 5G devices? And this is where consumers are willing to take advantage of trade-in programs that carriers and retailers are offering to trade in their older devices as they are upgrading to newer devices. So that not only creates a monetary advantage for those consumers who are upgrading, but also creates an environmentally sustainable way to avoid e-waste within our industry. As we may be aware of, e-waste in the smartphone industry contributes to about 12% of electronic waste that happens in our industry. So consumers having the opportunity to trade in and upgrade addresses some of these concerns in a very sensible way. We did some research recently. Our consumer research seems to indicate that 35% of the consumers are highly interested in buying a refurbished device. In fact, nearly 50%, 48% of the consumers were highly likely to pay for an optional monthly fee that would contribute to greener or sustainability efforts, particularly in Europe, where consumers are hyper aware of sustainability and what they need to be doing in order to make sure that we have a greener earth and a cleaner environment. Some of our clients have experimented with asking consumers if they'd be willing to pay, say, a €5 a month type of fee to participate in a environmentally sustainable program, giving them options to buy refurbished devices, etc. And heading into the holidays, 75%, 3 out of 4 consumers that we surveyed in the US were considering shopping sustainably for the gifts that they wanted to buy for their loved ones. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they were only willing to buy refurbished or pre owned devices. They would do their research, and if they had an option between a manufacturer A and a manufacturer B, and one of them was very clear about their sustainability policies, their commitment towards a greener environment, etc. So a large percentage of the consumers leaned towards buying their products from that manufacturer B, who had a clearly and well articulated initiative towards environmentally sustainable goals. So we think consumers are ready, willing, and wanting to participate in these initiatives.
So our industry needs to tackle this issue, and consumers are not only open to the idea, but really interested. How does all that ambition and interest get put into action?
Yeah, that's a great question, Clarence, because how do we move from the theoretical and the desire to practically implementing it? So first and foremost, we have to figure out how to scale these solutions within all the entire value chain of mobile ecosystem to create circularity, which allows smartphones and other connected devices to be efficiently collected, repurposed, reused, and when we cannot reuse them, they can be efficiently discarded in an environmentally friendly fashion. So if you look at what operators and retailers are doing around the world, but particularly in US, which is leading the charge here, is giving consumers an ability to trade in their older devices, like we talked about earlier. If you look at the US market, operators who are competing to get the customers onto their network are offering very aggressive trading programs, particularly during the holidays, offering $800 and in some cases for any device in any condition. So that does create that environmental awareness where consumers can now look at not just the devices they are carrying currently, but saying that, hey, I got a couple of older devices lying in the drawer and they are of no use. They are either 3G devices or 4G devices, maybe a couple of years old. So they bring in those devices and they trade them in and they get proportionate amount of value for it, unless it's a aggressive promotion like the $800 promotion that I referred to. But either way, they get to collect these devices and repurpose them when applicable. And if they are not what we call as beyond economic repair, then we find a responsible way to recycle that devices, either extract parts out of that and repurpose it, or sell it to other manufacturers or other device consumers who would be extracting those parts and using it in a repair environment or other such environment. Now, it's also very critical to be able to track and record what we are doing. If you look at most companies, whether they are public or private, they are starting to publish their environmental and sustainability and governance report. So these reports are auditable reports. They need to be accurate and they need to be based on certain standards that are set by these standard bodies that manage. It's very much like financial reports. They've not quite reached the diligence of financial reports, but the goal is to get them to be of the same level of clarity and accuracy. Now, how do you track what you're doing from an environmental standpoint? Typically the scope 1 and scope 2, which is related to how you're managing your building's electricity, putting sensors into all the conference rooms so that the power comes on only when you're in there, the air conditioning and the heating systems automatically going down to an optimal temperature after working hours. Those things are all done. They're I wouldn't say they are easy, but they are solutions that the industry knows about it. When it comes to scope 3, which defines what do you do as a part of your own business initiative, that is where, particularly in the mobile ecosystem, everybody struggles with it, or most players struggle with it. So if you imagine, if you are running a trade-in program as a mobile operator or a retailer who's selling mobile devices or other consumer electronic devices, and if you have an ability to track how many devices are you collecting, what make and model are these devices, what ended up happening with those devices, what is the carbon dioxide footprint impact associated with the consumer trading in a device like that, now you have a lot of data that is trackable and auditable to give you a clean record of what you're doing in your scope 3 initiatives around ESG. So to that end, what Assurant has done is we released a product called Carbon IQ. And what Carbon IQ does is, first, we work with the manufacturers, most major manufacturers in our industry, and collect information on a per make and model basis as to what is the carbon footprint of that particular device. And we record that, put that into a large database, and that's available. So now, as a consumer, if you go into a mobile operator or retailer and you buy a brand new device and you trade in an old device, let's imagine that buying a brand new device scenario first. Typically, when you buy a brand new mobile device, you create an approximate carbon dioxide footprint of about 90 kilograms, give or take, right? Depending on what make or model. For illustrative purposes, let's use 90 kilograms. Now, what happens is if you traded in an old device as a result of that, you were able to offset some of that carbon footprint because you're creating sustainability by trading in an older device. That drops down your net carbon footprint to about 50 kilograms of CO2. Now, if you were to, instead of buying a brand new device, buy a repurposed or a refurbished device, then that carbon footprint drops down further to a 40 kilogram level. Now, this takes into consideration everything, the footprint created by your manufacturing. If you're using a refurbishment process, what is the footprint that is created by the refurbishment process, transportation impact, all of those things are taken into consideration. So with Carbon IQ, what the industry has now for the first time is a tool that can track it very accurately. It is auditable. We use third-party companies like Carbon Trust to make sure that this is audited and certified for accuracy purposes. Now they can include that in their own auditable ESG report. So this is starting to get a lot of traction within the industry, particularly among our clients. They're licensing this solution and using that and integrating that with their retail environments to record these transactions that are happening. And it's also driving consumer awareness because now, if it's a corporate level initiative, all the retail personnel are required to run a trade-in program and ask the consumer the first time they walk into the store, hey, great, welcome to our store. Congratulations that you want to buy a brand new device. What are you planning to do with your old device? Did you know that we can give you monetary incentive associated with trading that in? And by the way, we can also give you a certificate that will tell you what positive impact did you create towards a carbon footprint on this earth. So these are very, very good initiatives. And to answer your question about how do we action this and track it and record it so that the industry can practice this as a mainstream operation.
Biju, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights on sustainability.
Thank you, Clarence, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about this important topic.